A little bit later, we'll meet the brains behind the electronic games, people who get paid to dream them up.
In 1987, Ron Gilbert and Gary Winnick made their directorial debut with the release of the game Maniac Mansion. While it is not the first example of a graphical adventure game, it debuted the Scum engine, a graphical engine designed to streamline gameplay away from typing commands into a text box to using a set of verbs on a select number of objects. This would result in a gameplay style that would become standard for adventure games during its prime years of relevance. Though the genre would fall out of popularity with the gaming public, the work of Gilbert and Winnick did contribute to some of the most beloved titles to grace the world of video games. I'd go into more detail about their careers in the game industry, but I don't think I could better explain their contributions than by explaining that these are the guys that are the reason that Putt-Putt is a thing. Enough said. I mean, it's Putt-Putt. Though despite their accomplishments, the two would not see the same levels of success as other developers like Double Fine or Telltale Games. And years later, after a decade of studio closures and underappreciated games, Gilbert and Winnick would reflect on the innocence and fun that they had with that original 1987 game, which gave the two an idea of making a new video game in the style of those classic adventure games that they made all of those years ago. From this mutual nostalgia and passion, the two were able to create a successful crowdfunding campaign for their newest title, Thimbleweed Park, and the result would be one of the most nihilistic pieces of media that I have ever experienced in recent memory. Okay, so I might have buried the lead here, so let me back up a bit. Also, spoilers for a bunch of adventure games and some content warning regarding suicide. For those of you unfamiliar with an adventure game, well, first I would say, dang, thanks for watching a video that I'm sure the algorithm is not going to love, but then I would explain, an adventure game primarily centers around a player character navigating and progressing a story through exploration and puzzle solving. Oftentimes, these puzzles will be solved by gathering and using items to find creative solutions to strange problems, where much of the game's challenge is deciphering the logic behind the designers. Though with this challenge came the biggest criticism to the genre, as puzzle solutions would become too convoluted or strange for players to believe that they were the only solutions available. And to the credit of the best adventure games, this is a problem that is less apparent to players, as these games will often take place in equally strange stories. Part of what makes many of these games so charming to players is witnessing the sheer absurdity that many would encounter in these games' stories. Thimbleweed Park starts off in a similar way, with the story centering on two detectives trying to solve a murder in the strange town of Thimbleweed Park, only to encounter a wide cast of strange characters, including but not limited to a pair of plumbers dressed up like pigeons, a disgraced clown who is cursed to have his makeup on forever, and the town sheriff who also acts as the coroner and the concierge to the local hotel. With strange solutions to puzzles and equally strange characters, adventure games are less compared to traditional stories told in film, books, or television, but rather a niche form of storytelling known as the theater of the absurd. Theater of the absurd is an experimental form of theater born out of a type of existentialist philosophy called Absurdism. This philosophy grapples with humanity's desire to find meaning and purpose within our lives, with the absurd being the struggle that some people undergo when no definitive answers are provided by our chaotic universe. Theater of the Absurd seeks to illustrate the struggle by illustrating characters who find themselves contemplating their purpose, often trapped in situations that they cannot understand or escape, no matter how illogical. Many examples of these stories will lack traditional plots, character arcs, or definitive conclusions, and find themselves often ending the play exactly where it started. This is relevant because if you have a good familiarity with point-and-click adventure games, particularly the ones that inspired Thimbleweed Park, you might not have realized just how many games follow this exact structure, with the most famous example most likely being The Secret of Monkey Island, where our protagonist Guybrush Threepwood journeys to Melee Island to become a pirate, where he is given 3 tasks to accomplish this goal. Guybrush completes these tasks, only for the evil ghost pirate LeChuck to raid the island and abduct Governor Elaine Marley to his titular hideout on Monkey Island. Guybrush proceeds to solve a series of increasingly absurd puzzles to help the other pirates and defeat LeChuck, only to find out that LeChuck had returned to Melee Island when Guybrush was futzing about, and Elaine had a plan to defeat LeChuck, only for it to be ruined by Guybrush's aforementioned futzing. And though he ends up defeating LeChuck with another set of absurd solutions, Guybrush never actually achieves his goal of becoming a pirate. And LeChuck would have likely been defeated if Guybrush did nothing. While it is a story with many interesting characters and enjoyable moments, to quote Ian Danskin, "The plot of The Secret of Monkey Island is something that attracts attention but has no real importance." And this is one of the primary goals of the theater of the absurd. It is meant to attract the attention of audiences to the sensation of the absurd, using stories that have plots that lack important elements like structure or resolution. And it is through this absurdity that many people fell in love with games like The Secret of Monkey Island and Maniac Mansion. Now, you might say to this, "Henry, if other adventure games follow this structure, what makes Thimbleweed Park such a nihilistic game?" And to answer this, we're gonna have to get into the big twist of this game. Up to that point in the story, much of the game follows a basic mystery where the characters Agent Ray and Agent Reyes are trying to figure out the identity of a murderer, finding a murder weapon, getting blood samples, and figuring out the victim's identity. During that time, secondary mysteries begin to emerge around the town. One of the agents, Agent Reyes, is clearly pretending to be a Fed so that he can investigate a famous factory fire that happened 30 years ago. Consequently, Agent Ray is tasked with getting top-secret information for some nefarious outside source. In addition to this murder, there is also much uncertainty surrounding the death of Chuck, beloved town inventor who owned that aforementioned factory, whose death occurred around the time when his brother also disappeared. But once a murder suspect is apprehended, the characters rejoin to solve the other mysteries. In addition to the agents, one of the characters who joins them is Dolores, a genius programmer, adventure game fan, and niece to Chuck. She begins to work together with the other characters to find her missing father. And this search eventually leads the cast to the ruins of the factory, where it turns out that Chuck had built a more advanced factory under the ruins to create artificial intelligence, which became Chuck's obsession in his final days before his death. For as their investigations reveal, his fascination with AI made him realize a shocking truth. By pushing computing to its highest capabilities, he was able to see the limits of his universe, revealing that his entire existence is merely a simulation. And not just any simulation, a simulation of the universe within the confines of an adventure game. And he realizes that the nefarious creators of this simulation will be repeating this cycle of Thimbleweed Park again and again for as long as people decide to play this game. With this realization, the character decide that there is only one way to stop the infinite cycles of the game from repeating itself. Someone has to descend into the inner workings of the game in order to completely delete it. As other characters resolve their individual conflicts, Dolores descends into the inner workings of Thimbleweed Park, which take up the form of a prototype version of the game. And as she gets deeper, it is posited whether deleting the game will result in everyone in Thimbleweed Park being free, or whether it would effectively bring about the apocalypse. The distinction doesn't seem to matter much to Dolores, as she slowly steals herself as she individually shuts off each component of the machine, her fate becoming more uncertain until the game erases itself. and for a moment, it seems that all is gone. But suddenly, a Commodore 64 boot-up screen emerges as it loads up Thimbleweed Park once more, and the game resets itself, effectively leaving players exactly where they started. So, there's a bit to unpack here. When taken at face value, this ending could be easily interpreted as some large meta-joke about the nature of adventure games as a genre, and this would certainly not be the first time a game like this made a joke at the expense of the fourth wall.
Yeah, at least I learned something from all this.
What's that?
Never pay more than $20 for a computer game.
A what?
And for many players, this was the part of the game that stuck with them the most and made it gain such critical acclaim from audiences, as they compared it to other games that break the fourth wall like Undertale or Doki Doki Literature Club. Which begs the question, which has served as motivation for me making this entire video, as someone who's a big fan of classic adventure games, why doesn't this game appeal to me like it should? One of the problems I could point out is the sometimes self-indulgent relationship this game has with other adventure games. Many of the jokes, plot twists, and even puzzle solutions pay homage to classic Lucasfilm adventure games in increasingly reverent ways. For example, when we initially meet Dolores, her biggest character trait is her love for adventure games, as it is her dream to work for the self-referential company of Mucus Phlegm Games, and her friends and family admonish her for choosing her love of games over her family's fortune. And this by itself is a very compelling homage to the early days of Gilbert and Winnick's career, though as the game continues, this admiration escalates into straight-up worship.
Dolores, I saved the best one for you. I can't tell you how to use it. The developers deleted all my dialogue in the hopes of keeping it from you. Your only clue is back in the original Kickstarter video. Everything you need is there.
Probably the most egregious example of this was when one of the puzzle solutions involves giving a Game of the Year trophy to an in-game version of David Fox, programmer of Monkey Island and Maniac Mansion. And this was a moment that I saw many people point to in negative reviews of this game. As for me, okay, well, the trophy bit is a little egregious for my taste, but most adventure games have been shilling for themselves since the days of Maniac Mansion, so I don't want to dismiss it outright just for that. I could also point to the ways that this meta ending lacks the commentary of other fourth wall breaking games. Say what you will about Undertale or Doki Doki Literature Club, but it cannot be denied that both of these works seek to subvert the core mechanics of their respective genres in order to deliver a message to the players. Undertale reframes traditional RPG combat as an act of violence in order to deliver a message on pacifism. Doki Doki Literature Club takes away player agency in a genre where player choice is the primary mechanic in order to create a horror experience. And in comparing these games to Thimbleweed Park, I'm left wondering if this twist is intended to act as a form of commentary towards adventure games as a form of storytelling. Aside from commenting on how absurd certain puzzle solutions are and how gosh darn cool adventure games are, it's hard to think of what kind of message this game is trying to provide. Now, I'm not saying that every piece of media that breaks the fourth wall must act as commentary on its genre or medium, but when put into the context of a game created by people who have spent many years contemplating and innovating the genre that they helped to pioneer, it leaves me wondering what is gained through this revelation within the story, which leads me back to the theater of the absurd. As mentioned before, much of this genre takes philosophical inspiration from Absurdism. While many other writers have contributed to this philosophy, the most relevant writers for the purposes of our discussion is Albert Camus, who wrote the treatises on modern absurdism with The Myth of Sisyphus. In this essay, Camus compares humanity to the Greek mythological figure of Sisyphus, a man who is tasked with rolling a boulder up a large hill for all eternity.
It is a task that serves no grander purpose, but one that induces great suffering. In other words, something that attracts attention but has no real importance. As Camus puts it, just like Sisyphus, we are often tasked with performing acts that serve no grander inherent purpose, be they jobs that we don't like, a belief system that we are pressured into, or picking up specks of dust. In the face of this, the tasks of living day-to-day life is made comparable to the plight of Sisyphus, and according to Camus, there is but one truly serious philosophical problem, and that is suicide.
It should be noted that when Camus discusses suicide as a topic, he speaks of it in both literal and spiritual terms, where he sees someone who completely devotes themselves to ignoring the absurd in favor of unquestionably following some form of belief system as a form of spiritual suicide.
While many look upon the work of Camus and absurdism more broadly as inherently hopeless, there are some distinctions to be made between this and nihilism. While the absurdist and the nihilist will agree that there isn't some inherent source of meaning within the universe, they each reach different conclusions. Absurdism advocates the notion of acceptance, which doesn't just mean accepting the state of the universe, but continuing despite knowing that there is no inherent meaning that is going to be provided. Though, as Camus argues, it is not enough to just accept and continue. It is also important to use this as a means of rebelling against this meaninglessness, not only by rejecting existence, but embracing life for everything that it has to offer without being hindered by blind faith in some other belief.
For while our lives are made comparable to Sisyphus, Camus concludes, one must imagine Sisyphus happy. Perhaps we can do the same for the people of Thimbleweed Park. After all, when other characters learn the truth about their world, they seek out the things that give their own life meaning.
Agent Ray seeks out the truth of the factory fire in order to clear his father's name. Agent Ray enriches herself by stealing Ron Gilbert's design documents. Ransom the Clown apologizes for his cruel jokes, and Dolores' father says goodbye to her before passing on. But for Chuck, this distinction does not matter. All that matters is that Thimbleweed Park is stuck in an endless cycle where the game will repeat itself for as often as the player decides to replay the story. To Chuck, repeating this cycle would be nothing but absurd. And in refusing to accept this, he convinces Dolores to follow his footsteps by shutting down the machine. When Dolores commits to believing her uncle, she effectively rejects the notion of finding meaning within her existence, despite the artificial nature of her world. And in Dolores' rejection of reality, the player is likewise encouraged to reject the notion of caring about these characters, ultimately adopting the nihilistic philosophy that there is no intrinsic meaning to the game's world, and it is pointless to try and construct our own meaning as a substitute.
And well, I want to call horseshit on that. Because if other adventure games have shown me anything, it is possible to have an experience that attracts attention with little importance that can still create meaning despite its absurdity. Part of the reason why Thimbleweed Park was able to come into existence in the first place is that so many people found their own meanings within the absurd experiences that developers like Gilbert and Winnick were able to create. Arguably, the fact that Thimbleweed Park so heavily markets itself on the nostalgia for classic adventure games runs in great contrast to this rejection of players finding meaning to this game's story or characters. And I should be clear, I offer no ill will to Gilbert or Winnick or any of the other developers or to anyone who enjoys this game, and people are more than welcome to disagree with my interpretation of things. But as someone who has grown to appreciate the sensibilities of the adventure game in the last year, it strikes me as strange that a game supposedly paying tribute to the genre would turn its nose at some of the things that it does best: create meaning out of absurdity. And I'm not sure what meaning was created by you watching my absurdity, but I hope it at least had some importance. Until then, thank you for watching. Best wishes.